the drinks trolley, because it's high time we were some kind of refreshment, I think. What have you gone for there, Suze? I can't quite see that.
I've gone for a raspberry Berliner style Weissbier. So think sour but tasty German style lager.
Yeah.
3.8%, so not too strong either.
That's very good. What's it called again?
It's called Boogie Fever.
Boogie Fever?
I'll have a glass of Boogie Fever, please.
Yeah.
Today's confession with another smart speaker goes to Steve for sending in this tale. It's very specific and it's football related, what with football being everywhere at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Dear Simon and the Collective, it is the 10th of May 2006 and Middlesbrough and Sevilla are in the UEFA final in Eindhoven. Myself and two mates went to this match. We shall call them Gary and Dave. Available accommodation was thin on the ground, local to Eindhoven. We ended up booking one night of accommodation near to the Charleroi airport in Belgium. A very good day out was spoilt by 90 minutes of football. Borough losing 4-0 to a very good Sevilla side.
Yeah.
The hotel reservation somewhere in Belgium was 2 rooms for 3 blokes. Our driver, who organised the trip, bagged the single room. Fair enough, we agreed. Myself and Gary, a notorious snorer, would share the twin room. No problem, I thought, after a day of excessive Eindhoven hospitality. I'll be out like a light. Always drink responsibly.
Yes.
The 120-plus mile drive back to our hotel, somewhere near Charleroi, was interesting. Back in 2006, vehicle sat-navs were not commonplace, so I brought my work's portable sat-nav. Unfortunately, this only covered major routes in Europe, and once off those roads, it was guesswork on the smaller roads. The journey to the hotel descended into thick fog, and it took forever, which enabled the effects of the day's excessive alcohol to sober me up. We eventually arrived at the hotel in the small hours of the morning. Nobody was about to check us in, and the hotel entrance was locked. However, Dave had the combination to unlock the door. 3 keys were left in reception, 2 were for our group. Dave goes off to his single room, leaving Gary and me to share the other one.
Okay.
Needless to say, Gary was out like a light, leaving myself listening to the crescendo of his snoring. After half an hour of tossing and turning and shaking Gary, it dawned on me that there was another key in reception. Remember, there were 3 keys and just 2 rooms for us. So there was a 3rd key for an unused room. This was ridiculous. I believe in the fair distribution of resources, Father Simon, and this clearly was not fair. I sprung out of bed, I propped open our bedroom door to prevent me being locked out, and went downstairs into reception. I got the key, I found the empty room, empty except for a small rucksack, which some traveller had left earlier. Well, they weren't here now. And I believe, I believe possession is 9/10 of the law in Europe.
Right.
And I was in possession of the room. Also, who was going to return to a hotel at 2:30 in the morning? A loser, that's who. I jumped at the chance. I went to close the bedroom door on the snoring Gary and put myself to bed in my shiny new room with the inconvenient rucksack. An hour or so later, I was woken up by a terrible noise. The noise seemed to be coming from outside the hotel. As I looked out of the window, I spotted a person at the front door of the hotel knocking on the door. It was either a madman or the owner of the small rucksack, and the person who should be in this lovely room. I closed the door to my shared room and I had nowhere to go. This person had obviously forgotten the security code and he continued to knock very loudly and incessantly. I sat tight. I couldn't go and let him in. That would mean losing my bed. His bed, I suppose, but I mean losing my bed. Also, he could be a madman and then everyone would be unsafe. He looked like a ruffian to me, and I was not going to let this dangerous man into the hotel at this time. Susie might disagree, but I know Matt would do the same.
Yes. Well, you know.
The knocking at the door continued, but nobody answered. This very bad man returned to his car, presumably to look for details of the security code or a gun. Who knows? Nowadays, it could be on an email. That's the code. Could be on an email on your phone. Car courtesy light went on. Then this very bad person returned to the front door. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to have to go and sleep in reception. However, much to their desperation, the door would not open. The door knocking continued. No answer. This very bad person returned to their car, courtesy light off, and he settled in for the remainder of the night. I was in the clear. After all that activity, I have to say I slept like a baby. At breakfast, I met my bemused friends at a loss at my overnight whereabouts. Dave had been questioned by the girl in reception on how many rooms we had used. Not knowing any Belgian or Dutch or Walloon, he indicated 2. None the wiser. I quickly explained that breakfast should be brief and we should probably depart. So therefore, I would like to thank, first of all, the bad person whose room I used. Thanks for losing the security code. Try not to look so rough in future. Surprisingly, the following morning, he did not enter the room whilst I was in it, though our paths did cross in the breakfast room, and I'm a good judge of character, Father Simon. I'm fairly certain he was a member of the local gangs, and he was up to many dodgy deals.
Okay.
You could just tell by looking at him.
Right.
Also, all the other hotel guests, thanks for not opening the door. But I did save them from a night of terror from this very bad man. Also, thanks to my 2 mates for being oblivious to the whole episode. But I would like forgiveness for deceiving the hotel staff that we used 3 rooms and not 2. Somehow, perhaps because of the language barrier, we got away with it, and we did only pay for 2 rooms when really we should have paid for 3. That was a
Nice
fantastic
fade. Well done.
One of my
Yeah.
very finest, I
thought
think.
so.
Steve needs forgiveness. Does he get it from harsh Susie?
Well, Steve, I don't think that man was a very, very bad man. I just think that's what you're saying to yourself to justify it. What if he was a really nice man with a family and, you know, he just needed somewhere to stay?
Right,
and
he looked rough.
I know he forgot the code, but it's not his fault. It's your fault. You stole his room, and that for that reason, stealing, I'm not forgiving.
Brother Matthew.
Well, he forgot the code. It's entirely his fault. I mean, how lucky can you get? Is that you get into a room, it's all nice and clean, and all for you. The only problem being that it's someone else's room. But it turns out that other person can't get back in the hotel. Fabulous, unbelievable! You've rolled a 6 every time there, and he should have remembered his code. Onus is on you, sunshine. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
People's verdict, please. Do you forgive Steve for his room theft? 61054. So our confession just before the news was sort of loosely related to Middlesbrough playing Sevilla in the UEFA Cup final of 2006.
Correct.
Anyway, we had Steve, who was on tour with his mates. He went to the final. It was a disappointing final as far as Middlesbrough were concerned. They had 2 hotel rooms for 3 guys. So consequently, Steve stole the room that belonged to a Belgian burglar and general ruffian. That was essentially what it... I think that's what it boiled down to. And the people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
So Lyndon Worthing says, not forgiven. They only paid for 2 rooms, but used 3. Not forgiving at all. But Jem the cleaner says, I forgive. That guy who couldn't get in the room should be more careful looking after his key code to get in. Plus, he could have woken the whole hotel up at 2 in the morning.
And he was a no good kind of person. He could have been up.
We've decided.
Yes.
And Kevin in Wiltshire says, forgiven. The guy is a Middlesbrough supporter. He's been through enough.
Okay, all right. So, if you have a confession maybe inspired by tonight's confession, we would like to hear it. Send it. Once we've grabbed something from the very fast-moving drinks trolley.
Oh, yes.
What have we taken today, Susie?
Without spilling a drop, I've managed to grab 3 crans of Brothers Cider. I really like their Berry Sublime,
Right.
Which is 3.4%, quite fruity, but they also are famous for their festival strength Perfect Cider, which is 7%, Matt, if you like something a
don't
little
think
bit
so.
stronger.
7%.
You don't muck around with that, do you?
Start the car.
Okay, you don't want to go to a festival and have a 7.1. That's a shocker. Okay, now today's confession comes from Lady Jane, and there are elements of this confession. I think this is like a 12 certificate.
Oh.
It does contain scenes with a scalpel. And there are also various scenes where we're doing the equivalent of pixelating.
Oh, really?
Okay, to avoid giving too much detail away. Father Simon and the Mediators of Mercy, you have aired 2 confessions recently. Gordon's French linguistic woes and Nigel's magnetic milk mischief. They respectively prompted and reinforced the realization that I need to finally confess to an incident that occurred far too many years ago in different times. However, I fear that this may be destined for the role of shame, which is precisely what I felt at the time. I, like Gordon, grew up in the 3-school system. All began well in middle school. Science was my favourite subject, and I found every aspect utterly fascinating. Soon I was top of the class. In fact, I had so outpaced the curriculum that the wonderful science teacher set me experiments and tasks to do from the first year GCSE syllabus, as well as a few things that would not be in any school chemistry books, but were a lot of fun. I was happily occupied in a corner on my own while she taught the rest of the class. As a shy, somewhat nervous child, this was utter bliss. Unfortunately, all of that ended when, arriving at class one day, we discovered that the wonderful teacher had left to be replaced by a mean, grumpy, incompetent fool. All were, not to put too fine a point on it, all my experiments were gone because he didn't have time to waste on special treatment, and I would just have to learn like everyone else. Well, I had already learned. I had already learned, and worse, he was getting it all wrong. His lessons were littered with rudimentary mistakes and errors. I would never normally have dared to speak up, but this was important, so I frequently found myself having to correct him on the basics. I bet that went down well. I consoled myself that at least I would have new teachers and new things to learn when I moved schools, and obviously picked all the sciences for GCSE. Well, the report he gave me must have been utterly terrible, because even though I got A star for every test, when I moved up to the big school, I was placed in the very bottom set. I, a dainty, shy, nervous, nerdy, girly swat, found myself surrounded by Neanderthals.
Oh, right.
And the bullies were unsupervised and bored. I felt that the only way to prevent the terrifying barbarian horde that my classmates comprised, some of them already had moustaches, from grinding me to a pulp for their lunch, was to attempt to be cool by teaching some of the more colourful experiments from my extra tuition. It is this attempt at self-preservation that leads me to my confession, as well as a school myth that has lingered on long enough for my nieces and nephews to have heard the story when they transferred to the same school many years later.
Wow.
The science technician's preparation room was attached directly to the classroom in which I and the beasts were housed, and it was left unlocked. All the equipment and chemicals I could possibly need were at hand. Amongst all the treasures I found were all the ingredients I would need to make up the bases required to create what I'm calling very dangerous substance number 1.
Okay.
This is a substance that is reasonably inert when in solution, but becomes ridiculously unstable when dry, detonating in an energetic explosion with the slightest touch, creating a small flash, a bit of a pop, and a lot of gas. Chemists will know exactly what we're talking about. Everyone else can just go with a very dangerous substance number 1.
Yeah.
My notion was that I would teach the petrifying pack of ogres how to make a weak solution of very dangerous substance number 1. They could soak paper in it and then leave it to dry, and it would be like flash paper. Unfortunately, the squad of blood-curdling brutes quickly bored of this game, and mixing themselves an undiluted batch of the solution, inevitably the Morlocks stumbled upon the science technician's fridge and the trays of dead frogs ready for dissection in biology. Soon these frogs were dunked and thoroughly soaked in this substance. I don't know what I expected, but what happened next was even worse. The frogs were returned to the trays, neatly arranged and put back in the fridge. Obviously, I wasn't in the dissection class myself when it happened, but everybody heard about it afterwards. As scalpels were drawn and flesh incised, the students, their hair, clothes, books, bags, the desks, the walls around them, even the ceiling, everything became far more intimately acquainted with frog anatomy than the curriculum had ever intended. Descriptions of the carnage resembling a painting by Jackson Pollock, and included the words viscera and pebble dash. Many students were understandably ill and upset. Parents were called and very serious questions asked. There was a lot of gossip around the school about how it could have happened. Some people hypothesized sabotage, others blamed poor storage and preparation. Therefore, I humbly seek forgiveness, Father Simon, from the entire biology class, the teacher who suffered along with them, the science technicians that had their work questioned, and the cleaners who had to clear the ceiling for the first time. I kept quiet out of fear, and I'm very sorry. I realise now that the teacher was so lax, I could probably have just gone to the library instead and saved everyone so much trouble. Fortunately for me, my parents persevered. The school recognised I was in the wrong class, and I am now a biochemist working in oncology and specialise in breast cancer research, because good teachers really do inspire.
Yes, they do.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting ending there for Lady Jane, who's clearly doing some good work, but in the process made up very dangerous substance number 1 and applied them, friends, colleagues applied them to frogs. Sister Susie, what do you say?
Well, I do feel for Lady Jane, because I can understand what it's like to be a nerdy girl in a class full of very colourful characters, because that was me in one of my classes at school, and it's not very nice. However, I just don't think I can forgive, because it caused absolute carnage and
Yes.
frog guts everywhere, and no, can't forgive for that reason alone.
Okay, Brother Matthew.
I mean, there is a school of thought that says if you're going to teach the Neanderthals in your class how to make very dangerous substance number 1, they're not just going to stick with paper, are they? They were always going to be applying it to something else that was going to explode. However, the chemistry teacher wasn't very good, was he? And everyone was a bit bored. And also the frog did get dissected, didn't it? That was the whole point, is we're going to dissect some frogs. And that did happen. It's just that the frog was obviously thrown all over the room and up everyone's nose. So for that reason,
Yes.
I'm going to forgive.
Okay, so it's the people's verdict, please, for Lady Jane, 61054. Forgiveness or not? When before the news, we had a disturbing confession from Lady Jane, who was unfortunately at school with some Neanderthals. It also involved very dangerous substance number 1, looked the other way now, chemists, and some frogs who didn't come out of it.
No, they didn't, did they?
Very well, in the
No.
name of science. Anyway, the people's verdict. Here we
So
go.
Steve says, forgiven. That was the best confession I've heard in a long time. I had to pull over because of the sudden laughter. Absolutely brilliant show as always. Gotta forgive. Samantha in Newquay says, you can't forgive frog guts going everywhere. That sounds horrendously gross. And I feel sorry for the class doing the dissection. Wasn't their fault that Lady Jane was in the wrong set. But Pauline in Fleet has absolutely forgiven. As a retired science technician, I have made that solution up. And it's such fun.
Have we got anyone who knows precisely what we were...
I think Pauline knows.
I think so. Pauline, thank you very much indeed for keeping it vague. If you have a confession, send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Okay, so it's 30 minutes to 6 o'clock. Time for a little drink from the trolley as it wanders past. Pushed by Susie, so she's helped herself to what precisely?
I've gone for a white wine spritzer this evening. Maybe a Pinot Grigio one.
You don't want to put a
soda?
decent wine in there, do you, if you're going to spoil it by adding something to it?
Well, probably not, no, but a nice tasty one, and it just means that, you can drink a bit more of it because
Okay.
it's got soda in it.
Always
Drink more of it. Lovely,
Always drink
yes.
responsibly, Matt.
Obviously do that, definitely.
Today's confession comes from Christopher. I'm going to give this it's PG-12 only because it's not as revolting as yesterday.
Okay. I mean,
But it's distasteful.
right. Well, I love a bit of distasteful,
Okay.
so.
Ah, yes.
Simon of the Forgiveness Forum, says Christopher. I wish to offer up apologies for an almost forgotten misdeed which I've been keeping hidden for over 25 years. Back in 1998, after 10 years working in the supply function at the NHS, I truly had had enough. See, I'm a creative soul. And at the time, there was a burgeoning industry of local radio stations crying out for fresh, new and interesting voices. I'd done my time on hospital radio, collecting requests from patients. We've all done that. And I wanted a taste of the big life, the bright lights and the fame. I thought I had a great voice. And I had something to say that couldn't be said doing an ordinary, boring job deep within the multi-layers of management systems within the National Health Service. I decided to give up the counting and distribution of catheters, syringes, and a cast of other unmentionables. You learn quickly within the NHS never to ask where a particular piece of kit is used or, heaven forbid, how. Having handed in my notice, I accepted my decision of future poor pay but good times, but long hours spent in a small, airless, soundproof, windowless box, playing tunes I thought was going to be entertaining. I was going to be entertaining thousands, millions maybe.
Yeah.
But in reality, I ended up probably entertaining a couple of lonely housewives, if any at all. Don't know why the housewives have come into it, but anyway, that's what he says. After my 4 weeks were nearly up, I was told by my NHS manager that the women in the office had organised a leaving do on my last day. I was expecting the usual sorry to see you go cards and stale prawn cocktail crisps in a bowl. You know the kind of thing. Not being the kind of person who shines with that kind of attention, I sort of shy away from such things. What was I thinking about a career in radio? Ah, yes, windowless, airless rooms. No one sees you on the radio, you see. This is before the days of webcams in studios, allowing studio managers to check you're working and not reading the newspapers or maybe watching the football while the songs are playing. At this point, I have to explain a particular we haven't actually got close to what this is about.
Yeah.
At this point, I have to explain a particular medical condition I had at the time.
Oh, good.
Oh, really?
Very hard skin on the heel of my foot. It had plagued me for years, and out of frustration... Now, can I just say at this point, if you have anything like this, talk to your pharmacist or your GP.
Okay, of course.
Do not do what Christopher does.
Oh, no.
It had plagued me for years, and out of frustration, I decided I was finally going to deal with it, and I duly did with my trusty Swiss Army knife.
Oh, right.
What?
There you go.
I started hacking away at the hard skin with the unsterilised blade until I could feel some improvement. You know, smoothish skin. I followed up the army knife with a quick sanding with fine-cut sandpaper to really make the improvement I was looking for. This guy's an idiot. It was, however, only a temporary improvement, as an infection soon made itself noticed.
Funnily
What,
enough.
you're kidding me?
Surprise.
You tried to sort your feet out with a knife and sandpaper. Fearing I'd given myself gangrene, I hot-footed myself over to the local A&E department, which is not where I worked, at the start of my last working day. And thinking that the good nurses and doctors would fix me up straight away in proper time, and it'd be out in no time, I sat and waited in the waiting room. I was duly triaged and told that there might be a bit of a wait. The nice nurse organised a trolley to free up the seat I was sitting in, and I was duly pushed into a side room to wait my turn. The A&E were very busy, dealing with proper injuries and not numpties like me. The minutes passed and I felt myself dozing off, and I slipped into sleep. When I woke, it was 6 hours later. The day was almost done. I didn't have a mobile phone. The NHS at the time only stretched as far as giving me a one-way pager that had pinged itself almost into oblivion with messages starting with, "Are you okay?" then getting progressively more and more aggressive in tone, including suggestions what my colleagues thought I could do with the cakes in the office. Eventually, a doctor did patch me up and reassured me that the infection was only mild, and I went home. Dear Collective, I would like to seek forgiveness for my past transgressions from the A&E staff, who had more important things to deal with, and my work colleagues, who I understand had actually made some delicious cakes. And there were no stale prawn cocktail crisps in a bowl. I was going to have a fabulous send-off, but I didn't have it because I chiseled my foot away. Needless to say, I cannot be forgiven for my own stupidity with a Swiss Army knife and sandpaper, but I have had a 25-plus year career in radio, which I'm still enjoying. Oh, and no recurrence of my hard skin. Oh, well, that is very reassuring. I wonder who this person is.
Well, yes.
Maybe
let's speculate live on
we
that.
could.
Yeah.
We could. Who is this Muppet who decided to get rid of his hard skin by chiseling it with his Swiss Army knife and sandpaper? What kind of fool can this person be? Sister Susie.
Well, he is a fool, isn't he? It's absolutely ridiculous. What I think happened is he just didn't want to go to his last day of work and thought he'd kind of get out of it by doing that. Also, if you're going to go to A&E on the morning of your last shift or whenever you're working, clearly you're going to have to tell work that you're going to be late, because there's no way you're going to be dealt with in a jiffy, is it? So you should have let them know in the first place, and then maybe they wouldn't have been so disappointed when he just didn't turn up. I agree with the colleagues with what he can do with his cakes. Not forgiven here.
Brother Matthew.
Well, I agree with Suze that he didn't really fancy going to this farewell do, and he was probably surprised that they'd made all of those cakes because he wasn't expecting much. But I'm going to forgive, because I think we've all learned a lesson there about using Swiss Army knives and sandpaper on our feet.
Well, we do that anyway.
Anyone might have been thinking about doing that. Well, don't do it, because you now know what happens when you use a Swiss Army knife on your own foot and try to cure you. And he's now gone, hasn't it? His thing's gone on his foot. So everything turned out fine, because his foot no longer has the thing.
And a 25-plus year radio career. Which
and he's been working in radio for 25 years. Yes, indeed. So, yes, forgiven.
Never trust a radio presenter with soft feet, I think that's what we've learned. Anyway, people's verdict, please. 61054, first word is Simon. Greatest Hits Radio. Good evening, it's 10 minutes after 6. Big 45 is on the way. Our album of the week is The Lexicon of Love, another track from that. And our 3 Steps to 7 at the end of the show, March the 15th, 1992. Before the news, we had a confession, slightly distasteful, I think, from Christopher, who had a problem with hard skin on his feet, which he decided to solve with a Swiss Army knife and some sandpaper. This led to an infection. He went to A&E and therefore missed a very nice leaving event which his NHS colleagues had arranged. Anyway, he's a radio miscreant somewhere. The people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
So Joshua says, not forgiven. Who uses a Swiss Army knife on their own feet? Ridiculous.
Correct.
But I've got to forgive this one, says Michelle in Bury St Edmunds. I admire him for leaving his boring job and going and doing something he truly loves. That deserves forgiveness.
Well, it wasn't really about that.
And Samantha says, I have to forgive him. Getting rid of hard skin on feet can sometimes be so tricky. He's often so stubborn. I'm sure his leaving do would have been rubbish anyway.
Right, well, that is surprisingly
Yes.
forgiven, I think. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, if you do have hard skin on your feet, talk to your pharmacist.
Definitely don't use a Swiss Army knife.
No, I think we're fairly... With zero medical information,
No,
we're
I'm sure.
right.
Yep,
Don't use sandpaper.
Definitely not that.
Oils and ointments and creams. Talk to your GP. If you have a confession, send it to us. confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Okay, well, this is also entertainment, and that's, I think, the way you have to introduce this feature. 5:45, Greatest Hits Radio, Thursday's confession. Pay attention now. This one comes from Howard. All names have been changed to protect the identity of those involved, though we know who we are.
Yes.
Father Simon, Sister Susie and Holly, and Gorilla Man Matt.
Gorilla Man.
Why are you Gorilla Man reminders?
Because a man approached me in a park and said to my wife, "You'll be all right. You're with Gorilla Man."
Still a very strange anecdote.
Yeah.
Father Simon, please accept this confession from a dedicated paramedic working for the NHS in the north of England. My confession dates back to early 2023, when, as you may recall, my colleagues and I in the ambulance service were embroiled in industrial action as part of a dispute over pay and conditions. And this is where we meet... I missed out a bit there. And this is where we meet the antagonist of our story, a young student paramedic on placement. Let's call him Rupert. Not his real name. Now, whilst the vast majority of students are friendly and happy to learn whilst on placement, Rupert was a different breed. Rupert was from a medical family, and boy, did he like to let us know about it. Despite only being in his second year of university, Rupert always liked to try and show off using fancy medical jargon and terminology to try and look smarter than the rest of us. Things like telling a patient that, quote, "It appears you have bilateral excess interstitial fluid gathering around your malleoluces," rather than just saying your ankle looks swollen, which is what that means. Rupert also made sure that we all knew that he disapproved of our stance over pay, but then again, it was quite clear that Rupert's parents were very well off, and that Rupert didn't have to worry about money. Needless to say, Rupert was not a popular person on the station, and a small group of us decided to do something. Now, on the ambulance station, Father Simon, we have a training room in which we have full-sized training mannequins. It is not uncommon for us to have a laugh by dressing one of these mannequins in some spare uniform and leaving them sat at a computer desk ready for someone to come into the room. That kind of hugely entertaining prank. However, something a little more devious is what we had in mind. See, Father Simon, there was a story in a national newspaper about an ambulance service that got into trouble after a crew reportedly took a deceased patient back to the ambulance station and left it overnight in the ambulance before taking it to the morgue the next morning. I cannot stress enough that this is not something that I or any of my colleagues would ever do. However, we hope that Rupert didn't know this. Skip ahead a week or so, and Rupert's regular mentor was on leave, and so he was due to come out on shift with me and my regular crewmate, Dave. We were on an early day shift starting at 6 a.m. We took one of the training mannequins from the training room and placed it in a body bag on the stretcher in the back of the ambulance. We also put a smile and a wig on it and then covered it in a white sheet, just like you see on television. We then closed the ambulance up and went to the crew room to make a cup of tea and await Rupert's arrival. Our plan was to pretend that we'd only just arrived, as well as to ask Rupert to check the vehicle whilst we got our kit bags from the cupboard. Well, Father Simon, all seemed to be going without a hitch. Plan set, hot brews consumed, and right on schedule. 5 to 6, we saw Rupert pulling into the car park in his shiny BMW 3 Series, a present from Mummy and Daddy when he got into university, along with a private number plate. Oh, my goodness me. Positions, everyone, I might have shouted if I was that way inclined. And as it was, Dave headed out of the side door so he could appear to be just arriving at the same time as Rupert. And I headed to the controlled drugs cupboard so that I could appear to be rushing to book out the drugs packs that we would take out that day. Morning, I shouted to Rupert as he swanned into the station. We'll take that ambulance, I said, telling him the call sign and throwing him the keys. Rupert, please make a start on checking the vehicle. We'll just grab our bits and bobs, thanks. As Rupert headed to the ambulance, as you know, already fully checked and stocked and with a fake dead person inside, Dave and I snuck into the garage to listen for Rupert's reaction. Well, we got one. Boy, did we get one. Rupert opened the doors of the ambulance and uttered the kind of expletive-laden language we'd never heard from his previously well-spoken mouth. He then slipped and fell out of the side door of the ambulance, landing awkwardly on his ankle, which immediately gave way. More expletives followed. Dave and I rushed over. He didn't look good, screaming and clutching his ankle in a way that any international footballer would be proud of. He looked pale, and I genuinely thought he might have broken it. Now, Father Simon, Dave and I had a decision to make. Did we own up to being the brains behind the prank? Answer, no, of course we didn't. We lied where appropriate. And anyway, I took a look at Rupert's ankle, and after assessing it, was pretty confident, what with me being an ambulance man and everything, that it wasn't broken, just badly bruised. He didn't even have any excess interstitial fluid around either malleolus.
Yes.
So, Father Simon, I don't seek forgiveness from Rupert, who can't have hurt his ankle that badly since he posted photos out on the lash with his rugby chums that very night on his Instagram feed. Though oddly, it did hurt him enough for him to try and get out of carrying any kit bag on his next shift a week later. No, Father Simon, I asked forgiveness from Rupert's flatmates, who apparently had to hear about his brush with death for weeks afterwards. Rupert, meanwhile, didn't change his ways and earned himself such a reputation that no one wanted to work with him anywhere. Thankfully, students often rotate around different stations each year, so we only had a few more months. He's just finished his degree, and he's made a big deal about how he's going to work in London, which is fine by all of us. Okay, so an insight into the workings of the ambulance service, courtesy of Howard. It's another prank. You either find pranks funny or you don't, but Sister Holly is going first.
Well, the thing is, Howard, no one likes a show-off, and so I can totally relate to you on that. However, I don't like pranks. It's a sort of passive-aggressive expression of your frustration. You may as well just talk to them and actually express the fact that you're not very happy with them, rather than doing some sneaky little prank. I just don't think it's immature, and I don't think it's the right way to go about things. And for that reason, not forgiving.
Not forgiven. Brother Matthew.
I'm not quite as mature as Holly. I'm all for pranks on Rupert and his personalised number plates. What's that about, by the way? Also, why did we think putting a smile onto the mannequin was going to make it more like a dead? How does that look like a dead body? Anyway, I'm definitely going to forgive, because frankly, you're going to encounter far worse than that when you're doing the job, Rupert. And maybe Mummy and Daddy can't get you out of that. Well, look out, London, because Rupert, you're going to have a lot of fun down here. So I'm going to say forgiven.
Okay, well, there's a surprise. Okay, so people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Howard? Yes or no? 61054. First word is Simon. Anyway, the people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
Forgiven, says Tommy. As a paramedic, we're always playing pranks on each other with those mannequins. Just hilarious. And Rupert sounds like a nightmare. But not forgiven, says Sarah in Stunny Stonehenge. Never think pranks are funny, and they sound a little jealous. I agree with Holly. A chat would have been the grown-up thing to do.
Is that right? Yes.
But Dean says, forgiven. Cocky student paramedics were the bane of my life for many years. Having been a mentor in a North of England ambulance service, I would often join in and help with a prank or a joke on them. Sometimes they just needed putting in their place. The job's hard enough without a know-it-all.
Howard, thank you very much. And for your confession, you get a smart speaker. If you have one for us, you send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.